Good morning, everyone. This is Robert Schmid with Deloitte Digital, or also known as Mr IoT, and this is Coffee with Mr IoT. It's a weekly show we do every week at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Central, and today we're going to talk about manufacturing and IoT, and I have with me Steve Shepley. Hey, Steve, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Robert. How are you?
I'm doing great. I have this thing every week when we start this. At first I'm a little anxious and then I get all excited, so it's kind of fun to do this. Steve, why don't you give us a little bit of an intro about you and what you do in Deloitte, and share something personal with us too.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Shepley. I'm a principal at Deloitte Consulting. Been with the firm for about 17 years. My real experience is helping highly engineered product manufacturing companies drive significant performance improvements through the use of advanced technologies. My specialty is really around the development of those transformative technology solutions that really enable clients to take out cost or increase productivity. My industry focus is primarily on discrete manufacturing. That includes aerospace and defense, industrial products, as well as automotive. From a personal standpoint, when I'm not at work, I spend almost all my time with my two crazy little boys. I also find as much time as I can to play tennis, and then when time permits, I sneak into the water for a quick surf.
Nice, nice. How old are your boys?
My boys are 5 and 7.
Oh, cool. Mine are 16 and 19, so I'm a little ahead.
Different phase, for sure.
So, Steve, today I thought we'll talk a little bit about IoT and manufacturing. And what's interesting is that actually you don't call it IoT. You actually have an umbrella term that sits above IoT. You call it, in short, I4M. What does that stand for? And what is it? Just tell us about it.
Sure. I4M stands for Industry 4.0 for manufacturing. And really, that's an umbrella topic that covers a whole host of different technologies and applications. And the reason for using that umbrella term is that really it's about IoT, but it's about building solutions that solve business issues. And we always want to stay focused that the new technologies are really there and in use to serve that business issue. And what I want people to realize is that to really solve that problem, you've got to make sure that you can both take things in your physical world, convert them to digital. You've got to be able to process that digital information and make it more usable. And then, of course, you've got to deliver that back to a user. So when we say Industry 4.0, we talk about that closed loop system that really takes physical information, transforms it, and delivers it back to a user.
Why 4.0? What was, I mean, I think I know what 1 was, but just tell us a little bit about the 4.
Yeah, I guess I skipped it.
It's so techy. I mean, I don't know. I almost feel like a geek now when you and I talk about 4.0.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm saying release 4.0, but I guess for the manufacturing, this is release 4.0. But obviously, Industry 1.0 harkens back to the original industrial revolution that we, of course, have all learned about, in school. And that was really the addition of steam power into the manufacturing environment. We've actually had multiple revolutions over the years. The second one happened, of course, when Henry Ford brought in the assembly line practices into manufacturing. The third one happened kind of late 70s, early 80s with the insertion of technology and essentially ERP systems coupled with lean concepts into manufacturing. But where we are now is at that next revolution, which is really where we take the smart connectivity and the insertion of these new technologies like IoT to really drive unprecedented levels of productivity into the manufacturing environment. So really, it's that insertion of new technology that's taken us to that next stair step in evolution.
You know where I was for 3.0? 3.0 was actually what brought me to the United States. I came with SAP, not with SAP, but I was doing SAP work for Procter & Gamble, and then came to the States doing SAP work here. So I guess I was part of 3.0 revolution, and now I'm part of the 4.0 revolution. Where were you for 3.0?
Well, to be honest, at the start of 3.0, I think I was just getting my first Atari, probably right around that time. I probably jumped into the game just about 5 years before the Y2K event. So I was just ramping up that curve of everyone overhauling systems for fear of a massive blackout that of course never happened.
Yeah.
I was a little after you.
So 4.0, what else do you have in 4.0 beside IoT? Before we dive into IoT, just tell us what's all included in Industry 4.0, I4M as you call it, or Industry 4.0 for manufacturing.
Excellent. And I even may break down some components of IoT, but to really build that Industry 4.0 solution, first you have to think about your physical assets. And what you want to do with those is find a way, if they don't already create information today, to add sensors and or new devices that allow you to capture information. So there's a whole suite of new technologies. Some you might actually put on the device itself. So lots of new sensor companies and startups are building those types of technologies. Second, for decades, a lot of our manufacturing companies have frankly been building sensors into their products, and they've been doing zero with them. So there's a lot of technologies around certainly just the pure capture of the information on an asset. And certainly when I say asset, it can be something as simple as a piece of inventory sitting in your factory. It could be a worker in your factory. It could be a customer that's on a remote site. It could be an asset that you sold 5 years ago and is now moving all around some mine in South Africa. So it can really be any type of technology that allows you to get closer to those assets. So with those sensors, now you've got really what I call the IoT platform that allows you to ingest and capture that streaming data. And I wouldn't say it's just big data, it is massive data, because you've got equipment producing signals by the second. So there's really that connective fiber that allows you to capture it. But it doesn't stop there. You've got to then take that data, clean it, transform it, and really put it into an analytical engine. So this is where things like machine learning, cognitive computing, a lot of those new techniques allow you to carve through those massive amounts of information and find new insights and new actions that frankly you couldn't see before. So lots of new technologies around the analytical horsepower. Then, of course, what I think is the most important and sometimes forgotten piece is the digital delivery, right? So what do you do with it once it's processed? Now, of course, we've had all the mobile technologies, alerts and signaling, but how in a much more customized, user-specific and visually engaging environment do you deliver that action back to a human to tell them what to do or direct them very specifically what to do, not a confusing dashboard? Or you might actually connect directly to a machine. You might send a signal to a 3D printer that might be distributed out in your environment. You may actually send it something to a control system to tell a machine to shut off. So there's lots of new technologies that allow you to actually connect to the user or the physical asset better. Some of those are forms of sensors and controls. Some of those are things like augmented reality. Some can be through a wearable. So again, lots of technologies are kind of sitting within the fabric of the Industry 4.0 solutions. And there's some very exciting use cases that enables. I think a great example is something like predictive maintenance. Probably for decades now, we've been talking about doing predictive maintenance in manufacturing, but there was always this massive latency between what was happening with your asset in the field. How do you get that information? What do you do with it? How do you predict it? And oh, by the way, I didn't collect enough information. I might have known how many hours the machine was working. I didn't know the temperature, the elevation, or potentially the other things around that asset, like the heat of the engine that could cause my compressor to fail. So the ability and the reduction in that latency has created what I think is now truly predictive maintenance solutions, where either on an edge basis, I can send a signal right on the mine side for a new part, or I can get back all the way back into my processing system and actually enable inventory to move through my system faster to that asset before they knew that they needed it. So very exciting solutions sit in the world of predictive maintenance. That isn't just it though. You can add intelligence to any of your assets. Simple things like getting a sensor onto your inventory while it might be in a long duration delivery cycle. Example, if you've got a large piece of equipment that you finalize in a factory and it goes to a train, to a ship, to a truck, and eventually gets to its site, how do you know where it is? How do you make sure the associated components that need to get delivered with it are going to seamlessly integrate? So having that visibility and that asset intelligence throughout a delivery sequence allows you to do fantastic things around inventory balancing, optimal configuration management, and of course, drive higher levels of customer service. Again, if you can't get business value out of these investments, they're not worth it.
Got it. So I can tell you're really excited about this. By the way, welcome to Coffee with Mr. IoT, our weekly video broadcast. Today we have with us Steve Shepley, our Industry 4.0 manufacturing lead. So Steve, you talked about a lot of things. You talked about brownfields, existing sensors that we don't, not everything has to be newly instrumented. There's brownfields, as we call them in Tech Twins. You talked about edge processing, lots of predictive maintenance. Doesn't have to happen so much in delay anymore. It can happen now. You can do it now. And even on the edge, you can do it faster where you do some edge computing, which is really fascinating. And you talked about augmented reality, and you talked about wearables. Where does 3D printing fit? I know this isn't IoT, but I always find myself curious what people have to say about 3D printing. I, by the way, do have a 3D printer upstairs, and I'm actually talking to support right now because it's not printing right. But other than that, where does it fit in the bigger schema, not in like Robert's little world at home?
Right, right, and you're certainly right. I think a decade ago we started tinkering with 3D printing and making toys, but it has really advanced to a state where there are some true industrial applications, and where it really fits is for environments where time is of the essence, and maintaining large populations of highly customized inventory just frankly isn't possible anymore. Great example, I work a lot with companies that produce fighter jets. Those fighter jets sit on aircraft carriers. Aircraft carriers can have new fighter jets, old fighter jets. Imagine when there's a very specific part that goes down and you're in theater, the ability to get a part out there very fast is near impossible. So actually having those assets and to digitally try to predict when it's going to fail, and then to actually trigger the printer to figure out how am I going to go print some specific piece that might actually be on a carrier for an old A10 is new opportunities that we've got. Now, of course, the ability is just now coming to fruition to do printing in titanium and metals. Where we've really reached scale today is a lot of things that tend to not be on the hot side of the engine, but maybe some of the cooler parts that are not cooler, meaning cool in temperature, some of the plastics and some of the more nuanced parts that might be in the cockpit. So there's this ability to now use 3D printing to really serve and provide customer service where previously it hasn't been possible. So that's a real kind of real-time application. You can also apply that to the automotive industry. You've got your 1989 car that you still need parts for. It's very unlikely that the OEM wants to make that part or the dealer's got one. So you can go print that new brake pedal and actually have it on your car in a relatively short amount of time. So lots of new applications are fitting into this, but it requires a digital thread. Right, you've got to be able to know where that drawing is, how to connect that drawing specifically to what the feature or application. You have to tweak and modify it to make it specific to that user's need, and then you've got to print it and deliver it and get that signal back. So really 3D printing fits around that digital thread that sits within our Industry 4.0 loop that I described earlier.
Got it. So it's funny, right? You talk about fighter jets. I saw the same thing yesterday watching. I sail, right? Sailing is one of my passions, and I just saw that Team Oracle, they print custom parts for that because it's so much. They can do intricate things now that they could never do before. What fascinates me is that these things now are printed in materials, as you said, like titanium, that actually hold up, because the old plastic stuff that was in layers was very brittle, right? It was really more for modeling and for early manufacturing, like engineering ideas. And the thing that really I find about 3D the most interesting, fascinating, and so human impact wise is how we start printing human parts. Now, I don't know if you've heard this, but now they print the hip part, hip replacements. Rather than having 15 different types of standard hips, they reprint your hip and put that into your body. So those are interesting things. Same things with heart valves and so forth. So quite fascinating how we can print now with our own material, our human material. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, no, it is fascinating. I did read an article where they now want to 3D print food, and I wonder if we've gone a bit too far.
That's a very good question. So back to IoT sensors. I'm going to start with a light question, and then I'd like to apply it to work. So what sensors do you have at home? I have a Nest here, and every time I walk by, it blinks, and it sort of like freaks me out. I have those kind of things. I have a wearable. I have a watch on my hand, and so forth. What do you use at home, and what do you see being used in terms of not wearables, but sensors in manufacturing? What are the sensors that are bringing the most value in your mind?
Yeah, to answer the home question, like you, I've got Nest, I've got the various wearables, I've got, the locks on my.
What's your favorite wearable?
Well, my favorite wearable is actually the Fitbit, and that's more just because, as a work individual and someone who flies around on planes, you need to track, how much you're moving and the actual activity that you're doing. So I do enjoy that because it actually monitors things that previously I couldn't. So I find that a lot of fun. I certainly have enjoyed, adding a lot of the sensors to lighting control in my house, so you can certainly turn things on and control things, wherever you are. And I also love the fact that your alarm system that they install now are pretty fantastic sensors as well. So I can actually tell where my kids are, and if I want to know, are they still out in the backyard or have they snuck out in the alley, I can certainly sense and tell that, directly from my phone, which is nice. So keeps the
It's not Big Brother or anything, is it?
It sometimes feels like Big Brother, but I tell you, it keeps the stress level with my wife a little lower, which is nice. But in terms of the industrial applications, there's sensors now that really have come to scale where with something maybe 2 inches by 2 inches co-located, and again I'll use the inventory example, I can find out the ambient temperature it's stored in. I can tell the velocity that's moving. That means, has someone gone and picked it up and are they bringing it actually to the manufacturing floor? So I've got velocity, which includes speed and direction. You've then got, of course, the vibration elements of it. And then certainly if you can connect it up correctly, you could potentially get some more internal readings. But the ability to kind of spatially understand where it is and what it's doing is fantastic. And I think interesting applications of little tiny sensors like simple weight sensors and fill level sensors I've seen applied into inventory situations. I mean, believe it or not, in manufacturing, once a year or twice a year, they do API, annual physical inventory. The entire factory walks around and counts everything in every bin.
Yeah.
Companies, that's a bit of a waste of time. And then of course they do that twice a year because the inventory just gets inaccurate over time. Simply with a fill level and a weight sensor, I can know how many are in there. And with a fill level, I can certainly tell roughly where that bin is sitting, certainly if they don't weigh enough to trigger a weight type application. But just the application of those two alone take MRP from what I would call the passive reactive world into a truly dynamic MRP environment, which is very exciting because you wouldn't believe the amount of downtime and the cost for a manufacturing facility through inventory or stockouts or shortages. All of those can essentially be eliminated or predicted with these types of sensors applied to those applications. And they don't cost hundreds of dollars. They cost dollars and cents, which is fantastic.
Yeah, there was this Whirlpool example that we talk about where I believe they had problems with a certain part missing in the process, and then they couldn't finish the production of washing machines. And just by putting RFID sensors on there, they helped that. And then starting with that one part, they expanded this across the board and really gotten a lot of benefit out of this. And it's really interesting because I know RFID has been around for a long time, and I say people have an RFID hangover, but I actually don't see it anymore. I really think we've grown up, and it's been really through IoT, RFID has become really useful.
Yeah, no, I agree. We're kind of in a renaissance of RFID, but there's other interesting things. Application we were just talking one of our clients through was a Wi-Fi listening device, and most people say, well, what would you need that for? And what's interesting is that listening device coupled with analytics, you can pin it over the top of one of your machines, and it will listen to every time that stamp hits a part. And you can let it register and know when the part comes out with quality, and it listens very, very acutely. And when that machine fires slightly wrong, or maybe is 1 psi less on its pressure, the noise changes, and you can go quickly diagnose a quality event. And it's dramatically changing that usually that quality problem wouldn't be caught till way down line when some inspector finds it. But the machine says, hey, that fire was just a little bit off. You might want to go check that part before you invest thousands of dollars in processing it 9 more steps. So something as interesting as a little Wi-Fi sensor can even change the way your whole quality system works. It's no longer a safety net. It's actually a predictive machine, which is fantastic.
So you said massive data, right? I always say big data has become huge data. What's different today for a CIO and the manufacturing guys? What's really changed? I mean, as an ex-CIO, I always think the amounts of data we have is just stunning, right? And it doesn't really, there's just a whole new level of technology we have to deal with. But for the people on the floor and for the VPs out there, what has changed for them? How is this world different?
Yeah, well, I think I think it certainly has changed for the CIO because, again, like our last revolution, we got to implement these massive packaged softwares, right? ERP systems that kind of connected and essentially was one big platform for you to run your business. Today, these solutions require lots of different technologies, right, that need to be integrated and put together in different ways. But what's most important about those, and where I see kind of the people on the floor and in the manufacturing environment needing to couple closely with IT, is they need to be built around how the process runs. So no longer can you install it in the background and say, hey, I want you to run your transactions this way. You've got to go look at that user and say, okay, my job is to increase the productivity of a mechanic. That means he's got to have information delivered to him while he's standing there at a unit with a tool in his hands and maybe have a pair of goggles on. So you really have to understand that user experience and what you're trying to solve with these technologies. So I think what it's going to drive is a much more closeness between the end user and the actual technology build that you've got going on. So I think there's this big difference. And frankly, we're running into a talent gap. You've got people who've been out on the manufacturing floor for decades where essentially they go read their instructions on some remote terminal and then they walk over and try to perform their activities, right on the floor. They're not used to having new technologies that really change the way they do their work. So it's kind of interesting to see how you've got to retrain your workforce to run on constant information, analytics, and data versus what a lot of times was gut feel and experience. We're kind of changing that curve dramatically. And it's exciting because with an aging workforce, certainly in aerospace and even in some respects automotive, the ability to bring in a new worker and have them highly productive in a short amount of time is starting to happen. And that's quite exciting because that's one of our biggest challenges to be competitive with certainly, China and other manufacturing industries where they've got large swaths of labor that they've trained up that are more young than ours.
Cool. Shep, we have a few more minutes. For people that want to ask questions on the left, there's a Q&A button. You can click on there and ask questions. I saw Dan Rhodes said something like, Steve, stay clear of trestles until the sharks finish eating the whale bits. There must be some inside joke. Do you want to share or do you rather punt on that one?
Well, fortunately, I live a little bit south, so I haven't, well, I should say in the South Bay of Los Angeles, where, knock on wood, we've never actually had a shark attack, but there have been more spottings this year than ever in the past. So people are on edge.
Got it. I got it. So any closing words, any closing thoughts? We'll see if any questions come in, but I'll watch that. Any closing thoughts, Shep? Thanks for joining. This has been fun. I always enjoy being with you and talking with you about this. What do you think? Where are we going to go next? What's going to happen after 4.0?
What's that? Well, 4.0 is going to last us 20 or 30 years till we get to 5.0. I'm not sure what 5.0 is going to bring, but I will say this. We're on the forefront of 4.0, and the winners are going to be those that start to adapt now. The people that wait and think, let somebody else figure it out and I'll just adapt, they're going to be gone. They won't be companies that exist in 2 to 3 years. So you've got to get into the game now. You've got to start piloting these technologies, implementing these technologies, changing your workforce and changing what you do if you want to be a winner in this revolution.
Cool. I'm with you. You got to start small and do something.
Exactly.
You don't do something, you're going to just be thinking about it and you're not going to gain some of the benefits. Well,
exactly.
Well, there's no more questions. Any question for you, from you to me? Anything you want to say?
Yeah, so I mean, Robert, you hear about a lot of these struggles in manufacturing, and you probably have a purview across other areas, whether it's consumer products, retail, where do you see new applications in those spaces? Because I feel like they're ahead of manufacturing, right? We're kind of behind the curve on some of these. What are the things you think that we can learn from maybe other industries that you've seen that manufacturing might benefit from in a big way? Kind of the outside in question.
It's interesting. I spent a lot of time looking for parallels because part of the IoT practice is really finding horizontal use cases. So I'm going to answer it backwards. I'll come back, okay? But, we call it preventive maintenance in manufacturing, but it's really preventive anything. What I see around this is I always say today we know what we thought we knew before. Okay,
right.
You use that sound sensor thing, right? Before, we had someone who had acute hearing hear that something changed and would say something, but it'd be a lucky case. Now we know what is the sound and we can make decisions on this. And so the same thing will happen not just for preventive maintenance, where we will know before. There'll be preventive shopping, where we know before someone buys something, they actually want this, right? So this is, I call this preventive shopping, and this happens in healthcare too, right? You think of preventive drugs, right? We'll know what drugs do to us before we actually need to go to the doctor or before we have actually something bad happen to us. So there's a lot of preventive going on that's very parallel, and it fascinates me to see how technology, machine learning will have an impact on that. I like what Google did last week, really, where they actually for the first time put cloud into their top 4 priorities, and machine learning was a part of that, and that'll be a big part. I think one of the struggles you have is it's often a very blue-collar environment, and so you're probably behind in when it comes to networking and when it comes to really how to connect these things. I think the other thing I find, and this is true for other industries, particularly I think of oil and gas, is cloud adoption is behind. And what will happen is with, as you said, manufacturing, the last revolution was around ERP, and that's like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so the industry is used to large projects, big scale, often behind the firewall inside their own company. And that's not going to work anymore for IoT. So there's a mind shift around security that needs to happen. Not just a mind shift, but also a policy change, really differences there. And then there's a whole privacy discussion, right? And we joked about this before in Big Brother and your kids and your wife, right? But it's only a semi-joke if you think about it, because really what happens is my kids, and we see this in our own studies, feel very different about privacy than probably our generation feels. By the way, you did remind me that I'm older than you. Thank you for that. But still, I do feel I try to adopt a privacy view that's slightly younger. But, those things I think are going to impact the rollout of IoT and I4M in manufacturing. So networks, acceptance of cloud, and some security and privacy discussions that need to happen. That's about my thought.
All good points.
Well, I think we're at the end. We have no more questions. I think we're going to close Mr. Dan Rhodes' question here and say, call it answered. This is fun. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining. Sorry for the hiccups in the beginning, but I'm glad we made it happen.
Excellent.
This was Mr. IoT. Have coffee with Mr. IoT, and we'll see you next week, Friday. Have a good one. Thanks.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks, Robert.